Hello everyone, my name is Jennifer and welcome to Best Kept Plans. Today's video is going to be a May 2025 reading recap. If you're interested in hearing about the books that I read last month, please stick around. As I said in my introduction, today's video is going to look at all of the books that I read in May 2025. I wanted to start out with some stats for the month of May. I always keep all of my stats in my Art Journal of Reading journal. For the month of May, I read a total of 15 books. I read 0 books fully physical only. I read 1 book completely digitally. I read 2 books on audiobook only, and I read 12 books that were a combination of audiobook and either digital book or physical book. The number of pages that I read was 5,461. My average rating was 3.96. I read 6 books that were either ARCs or ALCs. I read 5 books that contributed to my 2025 reading challenges. I read 11 books from my physical TBR, and I read 6 books that I took out from the library. Those were primarily audiobooks that I borrowed using my Libby and Hoopla apps. Now that we have all my stats out of the way, we are going to talk all about the books that I read in the month of May 2025. The first book that I read in May was on my TBR, and it fulfilled the prompt that was to read a book with a 3-word title, and that book is Half a Soul by Olivia Atwater. This is a Regency era novel. I remember initially being a little bit concerned about the romance aspect of this book because of the personality of our male main character, but he definitely grows on the reader as the book goes on. You realize that he's actually very thoughtful in the things that he says and does, which I think as a reader I really appreciated, and I really enjoyed our female main character, and I thought the fantasy elements were really fun, and ended up giving this book a 4 out of 5 stars. The next book that I read in the month of May was also on my TBR, and it fulfilled the prompt that was to read a book that was gifted to me, and so I decided to pick an arc for this, and I ended up picking The Love Haters by Katherine. I really wanted to like this book, and unfortunately this book just did not work for me personally. There was a lot of things about it that I wasn't a huge fan of. I just couldn't become invested. I thought there was aspects of the ending that were really drawn out. I didn't necessarily love the messaging on some pretty heavy topics and subject matters that were included in this book, and unfortunately I ended up rating this 2.5 out of 5 stars. The third book that I read in the month of May was also on my TBR, and it fulfilled the prompt that was to read the book at the bottom of my list, which I basically interpreted to be the book that was at the end of my TBR based on alphabetical order of author's last name, which is how I arrange my books on my bookshelves. And so that book was The Book Thief by Markus Zusak. I genuinely knew nothing about this book when I picked it up and started it. This is a historical fiction novel. The narrator of this book is Death, which I thought was a really interesting idea, and I found that to be endlessly intriguing throughout this read. I was so heavily invested in these characters in this story, and this book had me smiling. It had me absolutely crying, bawling hysterically, honestly. And I'm just so grateful that I read this. I love this. I rated this 5 out of 5 stars. And if you have not read it, I highly recommend it. The fourth book that I read in the month of May was also on my TBR. It fulfilled the prompt that was to pick a book with a couple on the cover, and that book is Say You'll Remember Me by Jimenez. This book dives deep into really heavy topics and things that can be really sad to read about. I did personally relate to this book. My father passed away from Alzheimer's disease in 2024, and we are dealing with a main character who has a family member who is suffering from dementia. I think Abby Jimenez did a great job of putting into words just how much that can affect an entire family. I thought the way the romance was handled was really interesting because these characters are in a long distance relationship for the entirety of this book. And that in and of itself comes with a ton of challenges. And I thought it was really interesting to see that in a romance novel because I think it's definitely a little bit more unique. I did really enjoy this. I did not love this as I have some of Abby Jimenez's other books. I ended up giving it a 4 out of 5 stars. The next book that I read in May was also on my TBR, and it fulfilled the prompt that was to read a book that had food on the cover, and that is Assistant to the Villain from Nicole Maehrer. I actually started this on the day that I had jury duty, and that was a great decision. I was stuck in a room with nothing else to do for many hours, and I had this with me to keep me company and keep me entertained, and it definitely kept me entertained. I listened to this as well as read along with the physical copy and thoroughly enjoyed it. I thought our female main character was really, really fun. I thoroughly enjoyed the villain of this story. He's a villain that is built to be someone that the reader can totally understand and empathize with and love, even though he's given the title of villain. I thought that this book ended off on a really interesting note, and I'm very excited to continue on with this series. I ended up giving this book 4 out of 5 stars. The next book that I read in the month of May was one that I wasn't intending on reading, but it made sense for me to read given one of the books that was on my TBR for the month of May. And this was actually a play, and that is Macbeth by William Shakespeare. I was also able to use this play to fulfill one of the spots on my classics challenge. I have not read Macbeth since I was like in high school or college, and I still understood or remembered like little things about it. It definitely refreshed my memory. I was so glad that it refreshed my memory. I enjoyed this. I didn't dislike it. I definitely have a hard time with the language. I'm not great with Shakespearean language. I ended up giving it a 3 out of 5 stars. After reading Macbeth, I was intending on diving into a different book, but my plans got a little bit sidetracked because I actually received a copy of Left Up Forever by Tarah DeWitt in the mail. Thank you so much to St. Martin's Griffin for a physical review copy of this book. I also received an advanced listening copy. This one is in the same world and involves some of the same characters from Savor It, which is definitely my favorite of her books that I've read. I really, really liked this. This was really interesting. We're dealing with a couple that was once married and is now divorced. And I feel like that is not something that we often read about in romance books. So I was really intrigued by the idea. We get some needed conversations as to why their relationship broke down in the first place. I think that unless an author is willing to dive deep and allow their characters to have those challenging conversations for the reader to read, this type of trope may not work. And so I was really, really glad that DeWitt went there. And I think that the book benefited from that. I ended up giving this 4.5 out of 5 stars. Really, really liked it. The next book that we're going to talk about is one that I am so excited to finally talk about. And that book is Caught Up by Navessa Allen. This is the second book in what I believe is called the Dark Verse trilogy. It is the book after Lights Out, which I read earlier this year. Let me tell you, I really, really love this book. This book follows two characters that have a really interesting tied together past. And it was intriguing to see them try to work beyond that past. There's some familial dynamics at play here. We deal with some more taboo sexual topics. It was so much fun, but also I felt the connection between these two characters, and I felt like at its core, this book did that relationship really well. And this type of book doesn't work if that's not there. And so I ended up rating this 4.5 out of 5 stars. I really, really enjoyed it. The next book that I read was the last book that I needed to read for my May 2025 TBR, and it fulfilled the prompt that was to read a book with a strong female protagonist, and that book is Lady Macbeth by Ava Reid. This is why I read Macbeth earlier in the month. I wanted that story fresh in my mind when going into this retelling from the perspective of Lady Macbeth. This book definitely takes some liberties. It's got more fantastical elements than Macbeth originally had. It centers around Lady Macbeth, and we get a lot of her inner thoughts and her perspective on events that were going on. It definitely shapes and changes Macbeth himself as a character. You get to see what the persona of Macbeth is from the eyes of Lady Macbeth, who in the start of this book, and I believe through the majority of this book, is a teenager. She's, I believe, like 17. She's being seen as someone who is now an adult, where she's given more responsibility. And I think that character development was really interesting. And I actually really liked the ending, which took a lot of liberties from the original play. And I ended up giving this 4 out of 5 stars. I actually really liked it. I think I liked it more than a lot of people out there do, given the rating on Goodreads, but I'm so glad that I gave it a read. After finishing all of the books on my May 2025 TBR, I decided to look at the stack of books that I have received as ARCs or review copies to pick something out of there to dive into. And I ended up picking out No Two Persons by Erica Bauermeister. Thank you so much to St. Martin's Griffin for giving me a physical review copy of this. This is actually a collection of short stories that all revolve around a book. And the first story in this book is about the author of that book and what happens in her life that leads her to writing this book. And every short story after that is about someone who is reading that book or who has read that book and how it has shaped their life or what lesson they've been able to learn from that book. And I thought that was such an interesting concept for a short story collection. To me, the book kind of petered out towards the end, but I still really enjoyed this. This book was good. I ended up rating it 3.5 out of 5 stars. The next book that I read in the month of May, I actually waited until this point in the month to start reading because I wanted the opportunity to listen to the audiobook as well as read it physically. And the audiobook for this came out on May 20th. And that book is The Conditions of Will by Jessa Hastings. I was very fortunate to be able to get the physical copy of this using a gift card, which was awesome because I am still in the midst of my book buying ban. And so I'm only purchasing books if there's like a total necessity of doing so, which is how I felt about Onyx Storm, or if I have a gift card. And so I actually had a gift card to Barnes & Noble and purchased this and actually another book that we're going to talk about later. Genuinely, like, I couldn't put this down. This story was so intriguing to me. The dynamics between these characters are so intriguing to me. There's a little bit of like a mystery element in the beginning of the story, and I desperately wanted to know what that was. And I had an idea about what I thought it was, and that idea was correct. It definitely deals with heavy subject matter, very sensitive topics. So I would certainly look into trigger warnings before reading this. I really enjoyed the audiobook as well. The audiobook was really fun. And I ended up giving this 4.5 out of 5 stars. So good. Really loved it. It is a standalone, but I kind of wish it wasn't because I would love more with these characters. After The Conditions of Will, I was really craving a fantasy read, and I was fortunate enough to receive this book in the mail and decided it was time to pick it up. And that is What Lurks Between the Fates by Harper L. Woods. This is the 3rd book in the Of Flesh and Bone series. Thank you so much to Bramble for sending me this finished review copy of this book. This is the first series I've read by Woods, and I just feel like she approached this series as a whole the absolute right way. We're dealing with a very complex world. We're dealing with a large world, but she's structured these books in a way that allows you to gain what you need as a reader in terms of world building without making it too overwhelming. In this book, a lot of world building does take place because we are in a new location from books 1 and 2. And I like the way that that was set up. We definitely get more into the depths of dynamics between characters that we've heard about but maybe not seen yet. We have our female main character coming into her own more and more and learning more about what she's capable of doing, even though she still doesn't have a total understanding of where she kind of fits in this world. I definitely feel like this book is a lot less steamy than book 2, and I think that that was a good call on Woods' part. And overall, I just really, really like this. I rated it 4 out of 5 stars, and I'm eager to move on to book 4 in this series. I, at this point in the month, was eagerly awaiting a new release, and so I wanted to pick something up that was going to be short and that I was going to be able to get through pretty quickly, and I ended up picking up Beneath the Sugar Sky by Seanan McGuire, which is the 3rd book in the Wayward Children series. It was super interesting, such a unique concept, really intriguing characters. I will say that I maybe didn't connect with this one as much as I have the first 2 books in the series, but it was still enjoyable, and I ended up giving it 3.5 out of 5 stars. Now, at this point in the month, I had been fortunate enough to receive a package with an arc of a very, very anticipated release for me, but I really wanted the opportunity to read and listen to the audiobook of this book. And I was just waiting for approval on a download of the audiobook through the Penguin Random House Audio app. And fortunately, that came through actually on this book's release date. I did also purchase a physical copy of this book because of the spines, and I was able to use the Barnes & Noble gift card that I used when purchasing The Conditions of Will, but I have the review copy here with me because this is the one that I actually physically read through. And that book is Releasing 10 by Chloe Walsh. I'm filming this video on June 1st, and I think anyone who is at all familiar with the Boys and Thomas series, all familiar with Chloe Walsh as an author, has probably already heard about a lot of the controversies surrounding this book, this author. I did see that yesterday or the day before yesterday, Chloe Walsh actually posted on her Instagram a reel of her explaining Releasing 10 a little bit, and also talking about some other non-book related controversies that have been brought up with respect to her. And I urge you to go and watch that if you would like some more context. But this book is the 6th book in the Boys of Tommen series. I read the first 5 books in this series last year. I absolutely loved them. I've rated every single book in this series 5 out of 5 stars. This series deals with incredibly heavy subject matter. Every single one of these books is dealing with really shocking things, especially considering that we're dealing with high school students. Releasing 10 is structured a bit differently, kind of similarly to the book before this, Taming 7, where we have a bit more of a background on these characters leading up to the current timeline. This book brings us all the way back to when our female main character is like 4 or 5 years old, and it takes us through her life. We do not end this book in the current spot in the timeline that the other books leave us in, and so I do think there's going to be a second part to this book where we're still in the perspective of the 2 main characters that are being talked about in this book. Again, important for people to know that there is very heavy subject matter that is being dealt with in this book. It is dealt with very graphically. I think that trigger warnings are important, and I definitely urge people to look into the trigger warnings for this book before picking it up. It seemed to me as I was reading it that this was probably the most personal story to Chloe herself. I just felt that in the writing. The character of Lizzie that we're talking about in this book, I definitely understand actions from past books more having read this. I did think Hugh is a character that we really knew very little about before this book, and I appreciated him as a character throughout this book. I did find him as a character to be a little bit unrealistic because of the fact that we're dealing with children, and especially in this book, very young children. The maturity level displayed by him, the responsibilities put on him, I found to be very unrealistic, but I understood that it was necessary in order to make this story make sense, or based on how this story was structured. I have not rated this book. I am not planning on rating this book. I don't feel comfortable rating it. I will say that while all of the books in the Boys of Tommen series have dealt with really traumatic subject matter, I still was able to find aspects of those books that were joyful and brought me joy and made the reading experience enjoyable, even though there was also hard things included. This book doesn't live in that space. It can't live in that space. So it's not necessarily a read that's super enjoyable because of the subject matter. I do feel like the second book about these characters has the ability to get to a place where we can have these characters experience joy again. And so I'm hoping for that in the next book. It definitely made me understand the character of Lizzie more, and I do appreciate that. Releasing 10 took me a couple of days to get through, and so I really didn't have much time at the end of the month to squeeze in another read. So I decided to go with a short story, and in fact ended up picking up the fourth book in the Wayward Children series, which is In an Absent Dream by Seanan McGuire. I really like this. I think this might actually be my favorite book in the series. I really loved book 2. I think I like this one even a little bit more. I really thought that the character that we're following throughout this was quite interesting. It was interesting to follow her throughout her childhood, to have her learning about this unique world that she ends up in, to read about the interesting dynamics between her and her father, given his history as well. I thought that it was interesting to see her learning about fairness in a unique way and how she brought that into the real world and how that affected her real world life. And this was just really intriguing and really enjoyable and a lot of fun, and I thought made for thought-provoking discussion. And I ended up giving it 4.5 out of 5 stars. Really liked it. And that is it for the books that I read in May 2025. Again, a really good reading month. I had a 5-star read. I had a bunch of 4.5-star reads. I had a few 4-star reads. If I had to come up with a top 3 for the month of May, I would say that in the number 3 spot would be The Conditions of Will by Jessa Hastings. In the number 2 spot would be Caught Up by Navessa Allen. And in the number 1 spot would be my 5-star read of the month, which was The Book Thief by Markus, Zusak. If you have read any of the books that I talked about in this video, please do not hesitate to put a comment down below, a spoiler-free comment down below. I love chatting with people about books. And as always, everyone, please be safe. Bye-bye.